about managing your property compliantly. So we've touched on how to finance it, by the principles behind property investing, and now you own a property, now you have liability, and now you've got to do the right thing in the right way, and there are consequences of not doing it properly. So you've all got a book that at the start, a Property Investment and Management Guidebook, and the idea here was to give as much information as possible if you want to self-manage your property or be aware of the things that you are responsible for as a landlord. So there's lots of checklists in that book, so please refer to them if you need to, and then we can help you with this stuff as well. So managing your property compliantly. This is an awesome, tells an interesting story, this graph. Landlord legislation timeline. So this compares the number of private renters in the millions, starting from 1980 up to today, and the percentage of houses that are in the private rented sector. So looking at trends, it's going up. The analysts say that it's going to catch up with Europe. Home ownership will be going down. Rented sector is going to go up. So this is going to be an increasing graph for the next 20, 30 years. And the red lines on here are all the years that significant legislation came out. So it's clumped around here, and these are all those types of legislation. It stops at 2019. There's actually way more than that has come out and will come out again. So buying a property puts you in a legislative kind of environment that you need to be aware of. There is more electrical installation condition reports. Believe it or not, it wasn't mandatory to have your property checked for electrical compliance. It is now mandatory. We've said this a few times, the EPCs, you can't rent them if it's a D or below by 2025. That'll be a massive talking point in the months and years to come. How do we get 25% of that property stock up to a level that meets the requirements? And so be aware of that when you buy something, because there'll be a cost to you to improve it. Renters Reform Bill, that's going through at the moment, and it's going to talk about how the rights that tenants have and the rights that landlords will have to ask their properties back. That legislation will change things quite significantly. So these are all the things that are happening all the time in their sort of landlord environment. So managing your property business compliantly, there are 6 stages to this, and we've touched on some of them before throughout the presentations. Before letting your property, have you got permission from a mortgage advisor that you can let your property? If you are a leaseholder, have you got a freeholder's consent to let your property? These are all the things that Michael and Clapham College will help you answer. Does your property need a licence? What are your tax obligations? You kind of need to know that before you kind of enter, and knowing the end game is quite important, as Sam was saying. Consider joining a landlord accreditation scheme. The advice is on hand, so pick up the phone, they'll answer questions for you. If you're using an agent, check they're a member of redress scheme, client money protection scheme, and they don't charge tenant fees. So some of the basics there before you let your property. Getting your property ready, there's a whole lot of stuff to do before you can move your tenant in. This is around certification mainly, so gas certificate every year, electrical installation condition report at least every 5 years. Portable appliance testing is recommended, it's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended and really the only way you can demonstrate that you've done your due diligence. Smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, this rule's changing actually quite soon, but again you need to check them on the first day of your tenancy and demonstrate that you have done that. Your energy performance certificate needs to be currently E or above, but it needs to be C or above by 2025. Does your furniture meet fire safety regulations, and is your water delivery system safe and compliant? So you now got a property that you can rent, it's all certificated, you need to find your tenants. When you find your tenants, you need to set up your tenancy correctly. How long is the fixed term for? So typically we do 6 or 12 month tenancies. It does give you an option maybe not to renew it if it doesn't work out quite so well. So going straight in at a 2-year tenancy may not be the right thing to do. Who pays the bills? Student tenancies often come with bills included. Just make that clear from the outset. You need to reference your tenant. It's advisable that you know a bit about them before you move them in. These are 3 main ways that people or agents do this. They credit search the tenant, they ask their employer a bit about them, and they talk to their previous landlord a bit about them. This stuff can tell you so much. Meeting your tenant is really important. Questions like, why are you moving? What brings you to Norwich? And that kind of stuff will tell you a lot about the personal circumstances of a tenant and will give you a view if you want to work with them. In this sort of business relationship, you're going to strike up etc. As Michael mentioned, carry out your right to rent checks. It's the landlord's obligation to make sure that this tenant has the right to reside in the UK, and you've got to check that and demonstrate that you've done that. You might want to get guarantors to strengthen that application if you think it needs strengthening, and you've got to provide the various documentation at the start of the tenancy. So quite a lot to do ultimately, and getting it wrong are the consequences that we'll see later. We'd always recommend getting an inventory, and you have to protect your deposit. This is quite old legislation now, in a deposit scheme, and you've got to protect it within 30 days of getting it, and there are consequences of not doing that. Once you've done all that, you can issue your tenancy agreement and get it signed. During the tenancy, the landlord has the obligation to keep the property in good working order, and they're responsible for gas, electric, water, and sanitation and heating of the property. Keep the structure and exterior of the property in good repair. Carry out repairs on a reasonable timescale, not very helpful, reasonable, but if it's a water leak, that's going to do it today. If it's, paint the wall, and maybe that can wait, but there's a judgment call to make there. You've got to maintain the appliances that you provide and the furniture, keep your certificates up to date, get the right landlord insurance, make sure it's fit for human habitation, give at least 24 hours notice. And the technical thing about here is they've got to accept that you're going to go around. They can't just sort of demand that you're going around and let yourself in. They've got to say yes as well. And to give your tenant quiet enjoyment, that's a kind of a legal term, it's in the contracts. You can't sort of badger them every 10 minutes, that's going to break the conditions of the tenancy agreement. At the end of the fixed term, let's assume it's all ended, do you want to renew it? By mutual consent, you can sign another tenancy agreement, or it can go on to a rolling periodic, both are acceptable means of proceeding. Consider a rent increase, so do that. So if your tenant's there for 3 or 5 years and you never increase the rent, you've probably lost out on quite a lot of rent. So do you consider doing it every year? Inflation happens, so make sure your rents keep pace with that. We find some self-managing landlords do fall behind the market. Inspect the property against the original inventory, check all the bills are paid, and if they've abided by all tenancy terms, return the deposit. And the consequences of not doing so of this can be a bit scary, but issuing documentation, you can't use Section 21 notice to ask for your property back if you don't issue the right documents in the right way. EPC, gas safety and how to rent guide are 3 of those documents. You can't charge unpermitted fees to your tenants, and you must protect your deposit within 30 days. And if you don't, there are consequences of getting that wrong as well. You need to maintain your property. If you don't, then your local authority can issue an enforcement notice against you. Your tenants can take action against you, and you might be asked to repay some of the rent you received if you don't keep it up to scratch. All of that stuff is in our property investment and management guide, so take a time to read it, and there are sort of easy to use checklists towards the end if you need to use it. That pretty much takes us to the end, so thanks all for coming and listening. I really appreciate you being here. And a couple of thoughts, Matt McKenzie, all good thoughts and ideas mean nothing without taking some action. So kind of decide one way or another and what you might do with some of this information. You might have more questions, are you going to get them answered, etc. I thought it was quite an interesting quote. The first bit actually from Steve Jobs, but then I think this chap added a bit on the end. Ideas without action aren't ideas, they're regrets. So think about how you might want to proceed after this event. So thank you for listening. Thank you to our presenters, Vincent, Sam, Michael, Molly and Emma. Thank you to Adam at the back for keeping everyone to time, kind of, well done. Thank you to Joe also for setting up and meeting us at the front desk, and thank you all for coming. These are all the speakers. Please contact the speakers. They're here for you, so do use them, and we'll be around for the next half an hour or so. Thank you very much. Well done.